5 goals in 18 minutes. Not in a training game, not against a lower league team, in a World Cup semi-final, on home soil, in front of 57,000 of your own fans. And that is not even the most disturbing part of this story. The most disturbing part happened after the final whistle, in a room that cameras never entered, where 11 of the most expensive footballers on the planet sat in complete silence, and one of them, a man who had played over 100 times for his country, locked himself in a bathroom and did not come out for a very long time. What happened in that dressing room on the night of July 8, 2014 has never been fully told. And the reason it has never been fully told is because the people who were there made a silent agreement, standing in that room, that some things are too broken to explain. Stay with me, because this story is not just about football. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand what Brazil is, not the country, not the geography, what Brazil means when it comes to football. Because in most countries, football is a sport. In Brazil, football is something closer to a religion, a national identity, a source of pride that goes back generations, that is passed from father to child the way other cultures pass down language or faith. Brazil has won the World Cup 5 times. More than any other nation in history. They invented a style of football, Jogo Bonito, the beautiful game, that the rest of the world spent decades trying to copy and never quite managed. Their players, Pelé, Ronaldo, Ronaldinho, Zico, Garrincha, are not just athletes. They are symbols, arguments for what football can be when it is played the way it was always meant to be played. There is a specific memory that older Brazilians carry, and it does not involve a victory. It involves a defeat. The 1950 World Cup final, played in Rio de Janeiro, in the Maracanã Stadium in front of the largest crowd ever to watch a football match, over 200,000 people. Brazil needed only a draw against Uruguay to win the tournament. Uruguay scored twice in the second half. Brazil lost. The aftermath was described by Brazilian journalists who were there as a national funeral. Players wept openly on the pitch. Fans sat in the stands long after the match ended, unable to leave. One of the Brazilian players, the goalkeeper Moacir Barbosa, was so associated with the defeat that he spent the rest of his life being stopped in the street and told that he had destroyed a nation. He died in 2000, still carrying that weight. 64 years later, Brazil was hosting the World Cup again, and the ghost of 1950, the Maracanazo, as it came to be known, was present in every conversation, every press conference, every training session. The players knew the history. They knew what losing at home meant to the people watching. They knew that Brazilian football carried wounds that went back decades, and that they were being asked in 2014 to finally close them. And in 2014, Brazil was hosting the World Cup for the first time since 1950, on home soil, with the eyes of 200 million people on them, with a government that had spent $11 billion building stadiums in a country where millions of people did not have clean water, with streets full of protesters who had spent months marching against the money being spent on football instead of hospitals and schools. The pressure was not just sporting, it was existential. Brazil needed to win, not for football reasons, for reasons that were much larger and much heavier than football. And then, 8 days before the semi-final, their best player got his back broken. Neymar was 22 years old in 2014. He was not just Brazil's best player, he was Brazil's entire identity in that tournament. Every attacking move ran through him. Every moment of danger, every piece of skill that reminded the crowd why they were there, came from his feet. When Brazil struggled, Neymar produced something. When Brazil were frightened, Neymar made them calm. In the quarter-final against Colombia, a defender named João Zúñiga jumped into Neymar from behind. His knee connected with Neymar's spine. The fracture was in the third lumbar vertebra. A centimeter closer, and the doctors said he could have been paralyzed. He was carried off the pitch on a stretcher, crying, telling the medical staff he could not feel his legs. Brazil won the match. But the dressing room after the quarter-final was not the dressing room of a team that had won. Players were crying. Some could barely speak. Neymar was taken to hospital. His teammates went to see him that night, and what they found, a young man lying in a hospital bed, unable to move, watching on a screen the celebrations of a victory that now felt hollow, broke something in the group that never fully healed. They still had to play a semi-final in 4 days without him. Here is something that almost never gets mentioned. Brazil also went into that semi-final without their captain. Thiago Silva, the defender who had been the emotional core of the team throughout the tournament, the player who cried during the national anthem before every match, who held the group together when the pressure became almost unbearable, was suspended. 1 yellow card, too many in the previous round. Think about what that means. No Neymar, no Thiago Silva. Playing Germany, the most technically efficient team in the world, in a semi-final. At home, in front of 57,000 people who had been waiting 4 years for this moment. The coach, Luis Felipe Scolari, told the press before the match that his players were ready, that the team was bigger than any individual, that Brazil would find a way. He was saying the things coaches say, but the people inside that camp, the players, the staff, the psychologists who had been working with the squad, knew something that the public did not. The group was not right. The absence of Neymar had not just removed a player. It had removed the person the other players looked to when everything felt like it was falling apart. And on July 8th, everything fell apart. The match started at 10:10 in the evening, local time. The Estadio Mineirão in Belo Horizonte was shaking. The noise was extraordinary, the kind of sound that makes the air feel different, that gets inside your chest and vibrates there. 11 minutes in, Germany scored. Thomas Müller, from close range. The stadium went quiet, in a way that stadiums almost never go quiet. Not the silence of a crowd watching carefully. The silence of 57,000 people who had just felt something cold move through them. 23 minutes. Germany scored again. 24 minutes. Germany scored again. 26 minutes. Germany scored again. 29 minutes. Germany scored again. 4 goals in 6 minutes in a World Cup semi-final. Against Brazil, at home. The players on the pitch did not know how to react because nothing in their careers, nothing in the career of any professional footballer, had prepared them for this. David Luiz, who would normally be screaming at his defenders, organizing, demanding, had nothing to say. He stood in the center of the pitch and looked at the scoreboard as if he was trying to understand a language he had never heard. The fans in the stadium began to cry. Not some of them, thousands of them. Grown men and women, people who had saved for years to be there, who had painted their faces and sung for 2 hours before kickoff. Standing in the stands with tears running down their faces while the players stood on the pitch in a state that the German players, watching from the other side, later described as something they had never seen in professional football. The Brazilian players were not fighting back. They were not arguing. They were not trying to change what was happening. They were standing there like people in shock, present, conscious, but disconnected from what their bodies were supposed to be doing. Germany scored twice more in the second half. 7 goals. 1 for Brazil. 7-1 now. Here is what you came for. The final whistle blew. The Brazilian players stood on the pitch. The German players celebrated with the restraint of people who understood, on some level, that what they were watching around them, 57,000 people in a state of collective grief, required some sensitivity. And then Brazil walked to the tunnel. What happened in that dressing room has been described, in fragments, by different players in different interviews over the years. None of them have told the complete story. But from what they have said, a picture forms. The room was silent for a long time, not awkwardly silent. The silence of people who have gone somewhere inside themselves that conversation cannot reach. Some players sat with their heads down. Some stood against the walls. Scolari came in at some point and spoke, but the players who were there have said they do not remember what he said. Not because they were not listening, because the words did not land. One player, whose name has never been confirmed, but whose story has been mentioned by multiple sources over the years, went to the bathroom and locked the door. His teammates could hear him. He did not come out for a long time. Nobody knocked. Nobody called his name. They understood. David Luiz, who had been one of the most vocal, most emotional players in the squad throughout the tournament. The man who had run to the corner, flag screaming after scoring a free kick against Colombia, who had openly wept during team huddles, sat in his kit, boots still on, and did not move for what teammates have described as a very long time. Outside the stadium, the city of Belo Horizonte was changing. Fans who had been crying were beginning to get angry. Cars were being burned in streets near the stadium. Shops were closing their shutters. Police were moving into position. The collective grief of a nation that had staked its identity on this tournament, that had watched its government spend billions of dollars and displace thousands of families to build the venues, was turning into something that felt like rage. Brazil was not just losing a football match, it was losing the story it told itself about who it was. In the days that followed, the players gave press conferences. They apologized. Scolari said he accepted full responsibility. The words were appropriate, and they were believed to be sincere. But there is something that one of the players, Bernard, the winger who had come on as a substitute, said in an interview years later that stays with you. He said that what he remembered most was not the goals, not the crowd, not the score on the board. He remembered the silence on the bus afterward. A bus full of men who had represented their country, who had been footballers since they were children, who had built their entire lives around this sport, and nobody spoke. Not one word, for the entire journey. He said it was the most alone he had ever felt in his life, surrounded by his teammates, in complete silence. Brazil played the Netherlands in the third-place match 4 days later. They lost 3-0. Neymar sat in the stands in a suit, unable to play, watching his team lose again. He has said in interviews that those 4 days between the Germany match and the Netherlands match were the hardest of his career. Not because of the physical pain of his injury, because of what he watched his teammates go through and the knowledge that he could not help them. Germany went on to win the World Cup 4 days later, beating Argentina 1-0 in the final. The tournament that Brazil had spent 4 years and $11 billion preparing for ended with them in 4th place, with 7 goals conceded in a single match and with a wound in the national psyche that some Brazilians say has still not fully healed. The German players, for their part, have spoken about that night with a specific kind of discomfort. Toni Kroos, in an interview years later, said that scoring the 5th goal felt wrong. That there is a point in a football match where winning stops feeling like winning and starts feeling like something else. Something that the sport is not built to handle. He said the German dressing room after the match was quieter than it should have been for a team that had just reached a World Cup final. Miroslav Klose, who scored Germany's 2nd goal and became the all-time top scorer in World Cup history that night, said he felt no joy when he broke the record. He said the circumstances made it impossible to feel anything except a kind of hollow disbelief. Even Joachim Löw, the German coach, gave his post-match press conference in a tone that journalists in the room described as almost apologetic. He praised Brazil. He talked about the tournament and the final ahead. He did not celebrate. He understood, in a way that the scoreboard did not capture, that what had just happened was bigger than a football result. There is one more thing. After the tournament, several Brazilian players gave interviews about the moment they knew. Not when Germany scored the first goal. Not the second or the third. The moment they knew it was already over before it began. They said it was the national anthem. In previous matches, the whole team had sung. Loudly, completely, in a way that visiting teams had found intimidating. The anthem as a weapon, a declaration of who they were and where they were playing. On the night of July 8th, some of the players did not sing. They stood there in their yellow kits, in front of 57,000 people, and the words did not come. The players who noticed it say they did not know what it meant in that moment. They know now. In the years since, Brazilian football has slowly rebuilt. New players, new coaches, new tournaments. The 2022 World Cup in Qatar brought hope, a talented squad. Neymar finally fit and back, a genuine belief that the moment had finally come. They were eliminated in the quarter-finals by Croatia on penalties. Neymar scored in extra time. It was not enough. The Mineirazo, as that night in Belo Horizonte came to be called, remains the sharpest wound in Brazilian football history. Sharper even than 1950, because 1950 was close. 1950 was one goal, one mistake, one moment of bad luck. 2014 was 7 goals. It was systematic. It was complete. But here is the thing about wounds. They change the people who carry them. The Brazilian players who were on that pitch, who stood there while the numbers went up on the scoreboard and the crowd fell silent around them, did not all disappear into failure. Some of them came back. Some of them played in other World Cups. Some of them found a way to carry what happened and keep going, which is, in the end, the only thing any of them could do. Tell us in the comments, where were you when the 7-1 happened? And if this story brought it all back, you already know what to do.